Good morning, pot pickers. This morning's talk is about schizophrenia, and not schizophrenia in the parts, but schizophrenia in the whole. So I'd like to explore more fully, more completely, the human mind, Maslow's self-actualisation, the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia, and the principles of induction and the formulation of schizophrenia in human consciousness. Which sounds quite a long mouthful, but it's relatively succinct. For many years it has been held, I think it's held by the RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Psychiatrists, that the mind is divided into parts: imagination, fantasy and reality. And yet, when we look at schizophrenia and the diagnosis of schizophrenia, we look at the classification in positive symptoms in terms of hallucinations, delusions, thought process disorder. But the human mind isn't separate. There is no separation between imagination, fantasy and reality. There is one reality. So when psychiatrists use the diagnostic criteria to say that someone has lost their link with reality, I'll get in trouble for this, it's only because they don't understand what reality is. So, for example, we consider imagination as a very positive virtue. Albert Einstein is quoted as saying that imagination encompasses the world. I'd say that it's software that encompasses the world. But imagination. And I remember very clearly going back to my childhood and watching Fantasia, and thinking, oh, Walt Disney knows a thing or two about Mickey Mouse. Yet there we had imagination at play in all of the novels, the plays, the playwrights, the books that have been produced over the years. To an extent, when we're dealing with what is considered fiction, if fiction is to be fiction, is that somebody is using their imagination. But in reality, the author, the producer, the technical director, is immersed in a world of their own and their making. And yet, as a designer of systems, you are taking inputs from many sources, combining, separating, selecting, choosing, and creating. For example, with fantasy, with Walt Disney's Fantasia, it is said that Fantasia is a representation of fantasy. But fantasy is only considered by psychiatrists to be separate from reality. Fantasy is reality. You can hold a fantasy, and for a fantasy to be true, regardless of whether it exists in the world. It's just to take someone like Walt Disney to bring it into the world, and everyone thinks, oh, that's fantastic, which it is. But with reality, we have the situation that it is considered that people with schizophrenia have lost their link with reality. I would say there's only one reality. The reality of the external and internal worlds, of the internal worlds of the human mind, and that it's virtually impossible for the psychiatrist to penetrate the reality of the individual, just as knowing people's thoughts and emotions and feelings and behaviours is almost indiscernible to the professional, unless they ask, which they don't. Anyway, I was concerned with Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. It seems very needy. And I fundamentally disagree with his view of self-actualisation. Now, it may be my opinion. I don't believe anyone needs to self-actualise. I don't believe that the self is an actualising machine or an actualising virtue. That it is not in a process of a journey of meeting some higher realm of intelligence or capability or admiration, but it exists on its own within the human and his condition as a, how can I describe it? As an embryo. So the mind is being melded. At the mind and the self aren't looking for actualization. They're looking for entertainment. They're looking for fun. They're looking for happiness. They're seeking out the enjoyment of the day. So when we talk about schizophrenia, we talk about hallucinations, delusions, thought process disorders, and negative symptoms. But all that a hallucination is supposed to do it's a signal processing problem. It's a problem of human consciousness, of induction, of quanta and neuroprocessing. And delusion, what is a delusion? A trick of the mind, perhaps. Perhaps things aren't right. Very often they're not. But why should someone be diagnosed with that condition? It seems very strange. Thought process disorders are quite interesting because the whole notion of having a thought processor disorder is that it assumes that there's a disorder. Maybe a classification of thought process disorder is correct, but maybe let's get away from the word problem. The NHS uses the word problem. Have you got a problem? How about a thought process difficulty that needs to be developed? And I think that one of the big problems that we have is that when people are classified as having a mental illness, that they are medicated without allowing the individual to develop their own degree, extent, and awareness into their condition, because it's certainly the case as psychiatrists have no insight. They can't even write. They can't even spell. They can't speak 7 languages, and they have no insight into individual people's conditions. So when we look at negative symptoms of schizophrenia, what I see is a breakdown of a similar construct of the induction of human consciousness and the quanta and the neuroprocessing that is causing the mind to fail, malfunction, but that it's more fundamental, that we actually need to much like when somebody breaks a leg, allow them to recover. And yet, in the health systems that I found, they provide care and treatment. They never allow anyone to recover. Anyway, I've recovered. So there we go. So I'll leave you with that. That's my take on schizophrenia. I wouldn't say that it doesn't exist, but I would say that it's misunderstood, misrepresented, mistreated, and over-cared for. Now, it may be folly of me to say that people need to to be free from a mental health system, but I would say that uh, uh, we have an over burdensome mechanism of declaring that people who work in the healthcare systems are professionals. Often they are very professional, but they don't allow people to exit the health service system. And that causes a burden, much like a pressure cooker, to rise up, such as at the moment great quantities of money are spent on health services. And I think if we allow people to use their own cognition, their own comprehension, their own understanding, that we will see considerable steps forward. Certainly a happier individual, certainly a healthier nation, and certainly a more effective society and a more effective health service. Thank you. I hope I'm not too controversial. It's my longest video to date. I quite enjoyed speaking that one. My next one will be on dementia and Alzheimer's.